That's good. I can go to another session.
Okay, let's roll.
Let's see.
Good. Simon just FaceTimed me with my wife. She's like, go see it. I think he's going last though, so
I'm last.
oh, you're last.
Yeah.
I think he's going second.
He's going second last.
Yeah, I don't know. Am I in danger sitting here?
It's like my parents at the time, because it's the summer, right? And so they're like, we can't have it be SUM as we are, so they just try to come up with something.
Like saying like Salam.
Yeah, no, exactly. Hey man, that would have been helpful a couple hours ago.
Thanks a lot. Why are telling us now?
No, I'm just kidding.
Would have been helpful a year ago. Thanks a lot.
I mean, I said it goes without saying.
It goes without saying.
I'm totally teasing you.
It goes without saying.
Yeah.
It goes without saying. What you said.
Because I'm just saying dessert.
Thank you all for being here, for not only choosing us among the 40 or 50 other great sessions happening at the same time, but also managing to find a room. Congratulations. My name is Dalia Magahed, and I am the Director of Research at the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding. Imam Shafi'i famously said, "I never once argued with anyone hoping to win the debate. Rather, I always wish that the truth would come from the other side." It's really this spirit of Islamic discourse, of civic disagreement, that we are hoping to revive and model this afternoon. ISPU, the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, is a research organization focused on the challenges and opportunities of the American Muslim community. One of our goals is to provide a neutral platform for the exchange of ideas, and that's what we hope to do today. What you'll hear in a minute here are at least two perspectives on a topic that's been hotly debated for at least the past 18 months. The question of, is it better to boycott or engage with those that we as an American Muslim community disagree with? The format is quite simple. Each panelist will have 7 minutes to argue for their perspective in their opening remarks, and then each will have 2 minutes to respond to the other side's argument. We are going to be managing people's time fanatically with our timer here in the front, so we ask your forgiveness ahead of time for cutting you off, if that need be. And that's what it will sound like if you go too far. We'll then have 20 minutes for written question and answer, which I will be moderating. Now, a couple of ground rules to make sure that we conduct this debate in a way that works well for everyone. Speakers, I thank you ahead of time for staying within your time. Audience, I thank you ahead of time for refraining from interrupting the speakers, no matter how much you passionately agree or disagree with them. So please keep all applause, techniques, and disagreement till the end. And finally, if you would like to follow the debate on Twitter at the same time that you're actually watching it, you can do so by following ISPU's handle, and we encourage you to post your own tweets with the hashtag ISPU Debate 2015. With no further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Abbas Barzegar, who is a professor at Georgia State University and will be arguing for broadly the principles of boycott. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalia, and thank you, ISPU, and all the colleagues, and you all in the audience for being here. I want to start by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to be clear that this afternoon I won't be making any appeal to the Quran or the Sunnah to reaffirm my position, but directly to your aql and mantak, your reason and your logic. I will be appealing here really only to history, both to think about the past that brings us to this present and to think about the future that will define how we are remembered in this certain moment. And so I'd like to just start by saying that the principle of boycott, of strike, of protest is one of the most valuable tools of modern citizenship. It is one of the most valuable tools that American citizens have, that global citizens have, to fight against injustice, to raise their own voice when they are voiceless. It is one of the most important ways in which you can exert pressure onto a system that you have no control about. And so I'd like to start with just a couple of historic examples that might resonate with you, might resonate with myself, and get us to think about why boycott is so important. And there's no better example than this weekend. We are in Chicago on Labor Day, and most folks might not realize, but Labor Day around the world actually is May 1st, all right? May Day. And that is an international day of worker solidarity that was based off of a protest here, a labor union protest here in Chicago that led a march of 80,000 workers to support the right of your 8-hour workday. That 80,000 worker march spread to 350,000 strikers across the country, shutting down 1,500 factories around this nation, and that started the legislative process to enable us to have a humane labor system, okay, a humane 8-hour workday. They never named Labor Day on May Day because they didn't want to give that much credit to that event, but they postponed it. But the rest of the world remembers Chicago on May Day, okay? And so boycott was effective there. My own personal heritage, in my own personal heritage, boycott is extremely important to me. My name is Abbas Barzegar, which is a Farsi name, and it hides my Hispanic roots. I was born to a Chicano family in northern New Mexico, and my entrance into political consciousness as an early adolescent was through my uncles, who were part of a number of Chicano rights organizations. One of those was led by the great Cesar Chavez. And Cesar Chavez is a lesser-known figure in American history, and easy to forget in light of, towering figures like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. But Cesar Chavez worked across broad coalitions to fight for farmers' rights, through hunger strikes, through boycotts, through shutting down agricultural sectors, in order to simply demand that you don't use poison on the plants that these workers are picking, okay? There was no other way except boycott to achieve those rights. And one of the examples of boycott, of economic boycott, that we might come to light in a very difficult, that we might bring to light in a very kind of difficult and sensitive space for us, is over the issue of the Muhammad cartoons, okay? Now I know that this is a hard one for us to deal with. This is a hard one for us to even return to discuss intelligently or anything. But in between all of the Charlie Hebdos and all the sort of right to free speech this, free speech that, back in 2006, there was a concerted effort across the Arab world to simply boycott Danish products because of the Danish cartoons. Now say what you will about that as an effective strategy to achieve a political end. I believe that everybody who participated in that boycott, and then everybody in this room realizes that there was no way you're going to stop people publishing offensive cartoons by boycotting cheese. But what did that economic boycott do? It let a 6th grader in Palestine realize that the cheese he eats, he has a choice over. He has a voice over, okay? It enabled a kind of democratic, nonviolent political empowerment. And that is an empowerment that extended to $1.5 billion of damages in the Danish export economy to the Middle East. Again, did it achieve the goal? No. And people in our own communities sabotaged the whole process. But it did exert pressure on a public conversation in Europe about their own limits of free speech, and it did give voice to us in a way that was effective, that didn't have to kowtow to this rhetoric of free speech, civilized society. It protected and gave voice to our rights. That economic boycott was extremely important, and we have completely forgotten. So now, as we move to the elephant in the room, on our three major topics, and I think that we will all address them in separate ways, over the last few years, the subject of boycott and sanctions have really rocked the leadership of our community. And I want to say that the very conversation has been so politically taxing, and I want everybody to ask, what is the political cost? What is the political opportunity cost of this conversation, of investing in certain groups? Okay, I support a boycott of a number of kinds of activities that our leadership is engaged in. Let us not beat around the bush. Everybody knows about the MLI program. Everybody knows how divisive it has been. I want to ask for a historical reference here. 50 years from now, when my grandchildren ask me, where were you when this was going on? When Gaza was getting pounded? What did you do? I want to say that I was at this podium asking for this program to be suspended. Okay? There is no judge better than history to determine our actions, and I want to ask everybody to realize that it is very clear from that vantage point. What is the political cost? What are you sacrificing? Okay? Also, when my grandchildren ask, hey, when the FBI had informants crawling around your community for 10 years after 9/11, and then they presented this counter-violent extremism community cooperation program to you, what did you do? I'll say I did like they told me in the 80s with the drug programs. Just say no. Just say no. You cannot, at a moment where the Irvine 11, okay, where Craig Monte, you guys remember the story about the FBI informant that was setting up entrapment cases of jihad within the Irvine Mosque community? All right, you cannot say at this moment that that was a valuable moment of engagement. What is the transaction cost? What are we getting in return? We need to boycott and sanction and protest infiltrative practices that are trying to, they're not trying to, that are actually hurting our community greatly. And so I guess I'm out of time, Daniel? Is that what you're doing? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
And next we will hear from Ms. Samar, who is the Executive Director of a Research Accelerator at the University of Chicago. She will be arguing for the merits of engagement. To begin, I want to say that I don't even think it's a question that we all care about the plight of the Palestinian people or any of the other issues we might be talking about today. What's in debate is how do we respond when we disagree, and how do we relate to each other when we do. I want to tell you a story about what happens when we take the time to listen deeply. Since we're at ISNA, I'll even make it a religious story. Many of us grew up in our Sunday schools learning about the Battle of the Trench. Right now, though, I'm going to ask you to approach the story a little differently. And as a caveat, I want to be clear, although I'm using a religious story, by no means am I implying that there is one Islamic approach, but there is one correct strategy. Imagine the scene. A year after the pivotal Battle of Badr, the Quraysh fight and defeat the Muslims in the Battle of Uhud. The Muslims are knocked down and feeling weak. So what do the Quraysh do? What any smart opponent does when his enemy is feeling down. They prep for a complete and utter takedown. They pull together the largest army in the history of the Arabian Peninsula to finally wipe out the Muslims once and for all. The Prophet, peace be upon him, summoned his followers to a consultation to gather their ideas and strategies. One of the non-Arab Sahabas, a Persian, Salman al-Farsi, stood up and suggested a non-conventional strategy that involved digging trenches. Now, what's important to know about Salman al-Farsi is that he was a figure who had embedded himself in many different faith traditions prior to coming to Islam, meaning he had been exposed to lots of different ideas and modes of thinking. Salman al-Farsi was a disruptor far before that term even existed. This strategy was radical in a culture where norms of engagement and tradition were almost sacrosanct.
This crossed the boundaries of what was acceptable. This was different. This was risk-taking. Why is it significant that the Prophet and his companions agreed to embark upon a very radical strategy that was suggested by a non-Arab? It's significant because they were not wed to any particular strategy. Rather, their goal was to survive. The Prophet realized that existing strategies weren't working fast enough in the way that was needed. He understood startup culture buzzwords far before his time. They practiced the mantra, iterate or die, to its most literal meaning. So what does this story tell us about our own decision-making when it comes to the complex problems we face, whether it's CBE, White House iftars, and yes, even MLI? It tells us that not only is listening to people who are unlike us an act of generosity and path to discovery, but if we want people to listen to us, we have to be willing to engage. The Prophet understood this. On the contrary, what happens when we make a particular strategy like boycott holy and untouchable, even when its current successes are questionable and random at best? What happens when boycott itself becomes our goal and no one else can try anything? We end up maligning, smearing, and outgrouping our own people and allies. What happens is where we are today. Every moment someone is boycotting an MLI participant and getting enraged about White House iftars is a moment they're not spending actually doing the work and making a difference in the lives of people who are suffering. Yes, you can boycott the White House iftar, but does anyone even care? Tweeting your disappointment in and insulting our own people is not the work. Changing lives in real and measured ways is. We could wait 100 years for a boycott against MLI to actually and directly end the suffering of Palestinian people. But when lives are on the line and the environment is rapidly changing, why aren't we willing to make room for other approaches as well? Which gets to what might be my most important point. Why engage with the very people who condone oppressive policies? Why does engaging with people who don't think like us matter so much? With rising Jewish criticism of the occupation and a recent nuclear accord between the Obama administration and Iran, it's more than obvious that there are significant fissures within the American Jewish community. Why are we not reflecting on these rapid global changes? Why are we shooting ourselves in the foot by only applying strategies that were effective in a world and a political context that no longer exists? If I had time, I would tell you another story about the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. I'm going to trust that you remember some of your Sunday school lessons and gloss over the details today. As a brief reminder, in this story, the Prophet, to the dismay of his most trusted companions, signed a 10-year peace treaty that included what some of the companions felt were humiliating concessions to Quraysh. In fact, some of the companions complained, why are we even at the table with people who have been persecuting us for decades? In the end, what looked to be a humiliating compromise actually turned out to be a massive victory because the purview of the Muslims was now the entire Arabian Peninsula and not just Mecca. Further, engaging with the Quraysh meant that the Muslims were now recognized as an actual entity and not just a renegade population. This recognition by his adversary mattered to the Prophet. That recognition allowed him to introduce himself and Islam to other world leaders, to other people who would listen. Even more striking, the Prophet was instructed in the Quran that if your enemy is seeking peace, even if you think it's a ploy, you have to work towards peace. Another mistake we often make is to rely too heavily on the rationality of those who disagree with us. People are not purely rational. People adhere to oppressive cultural practices not out of rationality, but because of culture and tradition. What's happening today in Israel is a perfect example of this. On its own, BDS doesn't challenge why so many Israelis support policies that are oppressive and violate human rights. There is something beyond the rational there. There's something beyond utility. And so if you're trying to replace what is pathological in an ideology, you can't just do that with boycotts or by relaying information to our own echo chambers. You also need to change the morality of the people who think this way, and to do that, you have to start with relationships. I'm going to end with another story. The optimism of one person matters and can change the world. Nelson Mandela did it. Through 27 years of incarceration, he saw the meaning of suffering. Yes, BDS was essential to that movement. But Nelson Mandela also had a deep willingness to engage with his enemy. And because of that, he changed the mindsets of 90% of the people who had once condoned a racist ideology. He changed the entire moral code of a people. That is why he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Here's the thing. We can't solve our most complex global problems without the people who see the world differently than us. These are people who are not like us, but people who are completely like us.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Dr. Hatem Bazian, professor at the University of Berkeley and Zaytuna College, who will be arguing for boycott.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, the framing of this discussion between boycott and engagement for me was problematic because it asserted that those who engage in boycott don't want engagement, and those who want to engage are not supportive of boycott. And I think that simplistic framing has to be set aside. That doesn't mean that I'm not committed for boycotts. I believe that boycott is one of the most successful strategies that is used by grassroots people and those who are kept outside. Today we are celebrating Labor Day, and we spoke about Cesar Chavez. Now many of us don't know that Cesar Chavez had a large number of Muslims that were actually marching with him during his boycott period. And one of the early people to die in that boycott movement was a Yemeni named Naji Deyfallah. Naji Deyfallah was one Yemeni worker in the Central Valley. And there is a labor union hall in San Francisco that has been named on his behalf. So you go down to San Francisco and the hall is named Naji Deyfallah Hall. I attended the ceremony that actually named that hall on his behalf. There are many statements that are being said about engagement of the Muslim community. It is not the engagement that we're critiquing, but the method and the approach of engagement that is taking place. And let me go straight to it. Today we are celebrating almost the 50th anniversary of the march in Selma, Alabama. We are recipient of that bridge that got us to where we are today, to be able to be full participants and members in this society. We are acting as Muslims as Johnny come lately, and the only way for us to actually engage by power defining for us the modes of engagement. That is a prisoner-guard relationship that we need to alter. None of us want our people to go to a meeting and thinking they are at a disadvantage. I want our people to walk in any meeting and feel that they own the meeting because they know where they are and they know there is about 6 million Muslims behind them. Today we walk and we think that we are being given the privilege to walk to a house that we built or our slave ancestors have built in this country. That is what we are critiquing. Now, Martin Luther King spoke on his Riverside Church speech where he said that he needed to break his silence. The betrayal of his silence is the thing that he wanted to break in that speech, and I think it's important for Muslims to break their silence on MLI, on countering violent extremism. And Martin Luther King at that time, he said that the US government was the purveyor of violence around the world. And as such, it's not for us that we don't want to critique ourselves. I can critique myself all the way to Judgment Day, and people know that I could do that. But when we think and treat the Muslims as the problem, and therefore engage with them as a class, therefore it's no longer countering violent extremism, it's actually committing extremism against our own people. That's how we need to be and to understand what is taking place. That doesn't mean there isn't extremists, there is. That doesn't mean there are terrorists, there is. If it is extremism that we're dealing with, the report said that white extremists in this country are the biggest threat on this country. Where is the CVE that treats and deals with white extremism in this country? And African Americans should stand up and say we want the CVE for dealing with the violence that is committed for us on a daily basis. Now, the MLI, and I know we have 7 minutes, so I'm trying. The MLI program. One is that we're dealing with an occupied people. We're dealing with an occupied people. That's a completely different of trying to have a Disneyland visit paid for by the occupying power agency. If you can't get that, then no language, no statement about helping the Palestinians by silencing them and going with their occupier to understand the pain and suffering of the occupier. Now, I know they're mentioning about Nelson Mandela and the Anti-Apartheid movement. I was in the Anti-Apartheid movement. The US government worked at the time for what's called constructive engagement, where they were asking us to go and visit to see South Africa and to understand what is taking place, but to understand it from the white South Africans. To use Nelson Mandela today is actually a complete turning around of history. Nelson Mandela refused to leave the prison until the end of apartheid is the first step, and then we could have reconciliation. Today, to go to Palestine and to say that we're going to try to end the conflict and engage with Israel because we want some level of understanding, it's a complete putting apartheid upside down. At best, if you can't tell the Palestinians, please don't attempt to speak for us. If you cannot tell Palestine, don't speak for us. At least you could deal with the dilemma of our own occupation, but don't possess us by trying to strike your own ecumenical deal here in America. About access, about circles of influence, about opening up to certain attitudes because you want to see. Please, strike your deal in America. Create your relationship with whatever people you want, but don't come to Palestine and try to ride our back into positions of influence and power because you're an enlightened person. That Palestinians have told you in the West Bank, that's not going to work. And I know the people you met with, they told you that this will not be accepted. I know the Palestinians in the West Bank. I know Hanan Ashrawi, I know her position. I know Mustafa Abu Swayy, I know his position. I know Bazian, I know his position.
You know the people as well.
Okay? And I know the Palestinians. So please, strike your economical deal in here, but not on the back of Palestinians.
All the speakers actually get their full airtime. I ask you to refrain from applauding until the end because we don't want to interrupt their time so that they can make their full argument. We'll next hear from Salam Al-Marayati, who is the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, who will be arguing for the merits of engagement.
I think we have to zoom out a little bit, first of all, talk about what is it that defines these terms. Because like Hatem, I also believe that one is not mutually exclusive from the other. That we engage on a regular basis, and there are times when we have to involve ourselves in boycott. And engagement then, therefore, deserves a definition. What is engagement? I define engagement, and people say we need civic engagement. Everybody says, oh, we need more civic engagement. But nobody really understands what that means. So I would like to posit a definition that civic engagement means that you have a presence along with other Americans in public affairs to gain respect and acceptance of your values, our Islamic values, to effect positive change in society. And I do gain from the Quran in doing exactly that. For example, when the Quran says that we will take people min al-dhulumati ila an-nur, from darkness to light. You have to engage the other to take that person from darkness to light. When the Quran says, "Idfa' billati hi ahsan, فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ." Repel evil with that which is good, so the one with whom there is enmity becomes as if he is your closest and warmest friend. And the Prophet Muhammad did exactly that. He built coalitions based on common ground, and he managed differences of opinion among his own people, starting with the companions themselves. So let us be a little bit humble and understand that none of us agree with 100% of these issues. There is no one claiming to represent 6 million Muslims. Anybody that claims to represent 6 million Muslims doesn't represent me. So we have to understand that engagement is the process. Even zakat, as many scholars have said, you can use zakat money to soften the hearts of people. So when we are told that zakat is used to soften the hearts, so that means people with hardened hearts. You engage them and you try to soften their hearts. And when Musa alayhi salam was told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to go to Pharaoh, that is a process of engagement. And when he said, go to Pharaoh and speak with him in a soft way, in a soft manner. Qawlan layyan. So that is what drives our process of engagement. We have the goal to achieve, but the process is one of engagement all the time. And indeed, the Quran also says, stand up for justice. Do not sell out on the values that are important to you. Stand up for justice even if it's against yourself. And it says, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرَجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. You have been made the best community for people. You تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. You enjoy what is right, forbid what is wrong. وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. So it's not a matter of if you engage, therefore you're against boycott, or if you boycott, you're against engagement. The issue is how. What are the tactics? And let me just posit one other, I think, important point, in that there's really nobody here that has institutional authority to tell Muslims what to do or what not to do. I cannot say that because you do something one way, therefore you're against me, or you're against the Ummah, or you're against them. I cannot claim that I know what your intentions are. There are times when we have to boycott Muslims. For example, there was a time where a Muslim went to the State Department and said that all the mosques are made up of radicals and extremists. And the Muslim women wear the hijab in the day, and they pass on secrets to Muslim extremists at night. And 65 Muslim organizations stood up and said, either you prove that right, or you retract what you're saying. And that isolated that statement. But that is really the exception that proves the rule. Nobody here is doing that right now. Everybody here has the right intention. And so when somebody comes up to me and says, we have to boycott other Muslims because they're acting against the Quran, then that to me is a red flag. I have to think, say, wait a minute. Let us come together. Unity does not mean conformity. Unity means managing differences of opinion. And until we have institutional authority, then nobody is representing anybody, really. Everybody is just representing themselves in terms of their views. Another red line about this issue is that we should verify information. So, for example, there's something that came out of the White House Iftar last year that said the Israeli ambassador spoke at the White House Iftar. How many people heard that? Okay? The Israeli ambassador did not speak at the White House Iftar. He tweeted about it, but then Muslims started thinking that he was actually involved in that. Now, I am also for boycott when it is effective. I was one of the first Muslim leaders that went to the Presbyterian Conference 10 years ago and said we should support BDS to end the apartheid practices of the Israeli regime against the Palestinians. And I engaged the other, and I remain engaged with the other, but with that stand that BDS is an important part of achieving justice for the Palestinians, and as an American, of restoring integrity of American values. And that's my last point. we have to start looking at these issues as Americans within, not looking from the outside in. If we are truly part of the American fabric, which we are, then let us engage the other, and let us not get into this infighting that really, as the Quran says, people then lose heart in what you're trying to do. Thank you very much. So.
We will now hear from each speaker in the same order with their 2-minute responses. Starting with Dr. Abbas Barzegar.
Okay, thank you again. Let me go ahead and start where you left off, Salam, and that is about institutional authority. It's precisely because we lack hierarchy and institutional authority that moments like boycott and protest and collective action become absolutely indispensable. Right now, Muslims involved in MLI occupy extremely high positions in our institutions, and the dialogue that they so regularly support has been closed off about this program. There is no transparency, there is no clarity. So as much as we're talking about engagement, why can't we engage our own community? It's at these moments of closed doors that we have to resort to petitions, that we have to resort to public interference and collective action. So it's precisely that reason that we don't have institutional democratic culture in our communities, that boycott is used in order to bring our voices out. On MLI, I think the case is rested. There is a sense of adab at the very least, that this is not anybody's issue besides the Palestinian issue. And so there should be some deference, there should be some adab in deferring to Palestinian voices on this issue. I want to close a little bit, since we want about proper information. So the Israeli ambassador didn't speak at the White House iftar, but can we confirm he was there? He was there. So as Gaza is being bombed, we're having dinner with the Israeli ambassador, and 11 kids in Irvine, California are put on probation for years because they interrupted a speech of the Israeli ambassador. The question is, I know you want to be at the table, but if they're only giving you table scraps, do you think an international security policy is going to be changed by nice smiles and cordial demeanor?
The thing is, we all know what is happening in Palestine. We all saw what happened in Gaza. We all know about the bulldozing. We know about the humiliating checkpoints. We all agree that this is an absolute violation of human rights, and there is no person on this universe who should support that. However, no matter how right or ethical it may be, when a message is too daunting, too foreign, too whatever, too different, the message is not heard. Information isn't what's going to change oppressive policies. Psychologists have almost no evidence that facts actually change people's decision-making. People tend to embrace the facts that already confirm their worldview. It's called confirmation bias, and we tend to disregard the facts that don't align with that view. This is how we make sense of the world. I can tell you right now that 16,000 children will die today due to hunger-related causes, and yet nothing happens but a lot of talk. Just think of the plight of the Syrian refugees. We all see what's happening. But at the same time, if we do come to the table with our enemies, if we do walk into a room with Islamophobic funders, if we do walk and enter a room with the table with Zionists, are we really that afraid of our own selves that if we sit down at that table with Zionists, or those who fund Islamophobia, or the president himself, that we're going to lose our entire selves, what we believe in, and what we know to be right? Are we that insecure? You're telling me that this body of American Muslims is so unintelligent, so uninspired, so easily manipulated? Some people might believe that. I don't believe that. I believe we are severely under-resourced, but that we are smart, we are capable, we have the truth on our side. And so, just finally, engagement matters because in this planet that is 2 degrees Celsius away from the utter destruction brought about by impending climate change, it's not us and them, it's we. And then we will hear a response from Dr. Hatem Bazian.
This way.
Yeah, we're fine.
We're from California.
Yeah. We're used to that.
The issue is not engagement. Once again, MLI is paid for by Shalom Hartman. And as we know in our language, there is no free lunch. So why would Shalom Hartman give a fully paid trip to a group of Muslims and take them onto this trip? That's something that participants need to answer, but the Muslim community need to answer. There's no free lunch in here. Second, I think we need to understand that in relation to the countering violent extremism, we are living a COINTELPRO 2.0. And I think we need to talk to African American experiences in the 60s to understand what mechanisms did the government use in order to really torpedo the civil rights movement in that period. For no other reason than to understand the whole strategies that have been deployed. We're not only the new kids around. It's all the way from the Palmer raids in the late 1920s, all the way for us to understand that we're not alone in this process. Therefore, we need to contextualize Muslim struggle for civil rights, for justice within the broader history of this country and seek consultation, engagement with those who are extending their hand, the Japanese community, African American community, the Latino community, and interestingly enough, and there I touched both, the MLI people, while they were in Palestine, the African Americans were actually issuing one of the most progressive statements on domestic and transnational. And therefore, I think we are living at a moment where local and transnational is coming together, and I think we need to take benefit from this, both in relation to CVE, walking while you're black, flying while you're Muslim, have to be connected, and boycotting Israel has to be connected to actually challenge the police forces in here, send their train together. If we can get that and build the most unique civil rights movement at this point, then we're missing the boat.
And now we're going to give you a chance to be a part of this discussion.
It's me. I'm totally nervous about this.
You're boycotting me.
I'm boycotting.
I'm clearly not neutral on this. I'm sorry. We'll finally hear from Salam, and then we will open it up to question and answer. But I just want, actually, before I give Salam the floor, we will be doing written question and answer. So please pass them to the edges of the rows, and then we'll be collecting them.
No problem. I think, number one, again, I wish people would verify facts before spreading them, because I think it's important to understand that there's nobody, in my opinion, I've never seen anybody who feels that when they go attend a government meeting or are going and attending interfaith, that this is a quote-unquote privilege or that we're benefiting. They go there, I go there, we all go there to advocate for the interests of Muslims and for people of conscience. And in terms of CVE, I was there with the vice president when 200 Muslims were in the room with him for 90 minutes, and 90 minutes was drilling him about exactly the same issues that you're talking about, and Abbas. Exactly the same issues. And so while people are protesting and working from that level, I think it's important to also have people at the table. And I wish, I hope, that at some point we can be more sophisticated so that the two levels of this kind of engagement and work are actually working hand in hand, not working against one another. So I think that's important. And the last thing, I just wanted to, somebody's supposed to be at the laptop. I got 40 seconds. I'd like to pass out something called the Islamic ethics of discourse, and I'll put it on the screen. And it comes from the Quranic verse, and pay heed unto God and his apostle, and do not be at variance with one another, lest you lose heart and your moral strength. Meaning just getting into so many disputes. Don't dispute things so much that you lose heart and your moral strength, and be patient in adversity, for verily God is with those who are patient in adversity. So I have 6 points in 10 seconds. Organizations and individuals will naturally conduct themselves based on their best judgment. I guess I'll save it for the Q&A. But it's the Islamic ethics of discourse. I think we should all look at it. I'd like to have a discussion about it and get organizations to support it so that we can manage our differences of opinion in a more effective way. Thank you.
Okay. As we're collecting the questions, I'm going to start as the moderator. And because we don't have a microphone that we're going to pass around, I'm just going to ask everyone to be very quiet because we're all going to do Q&A without a mic. So the first question, moderator question to our panel is this. Can you see an instance where your position could go too far? What would it look like if your position was taken too far?
We have to go up there, or do we
No,
speak from...
let's just all actually talk and see if we can.
Yeah,
I don't think...
I'll start. I can definitely say that when boycott and protest turns into a goal in and of itself, and when character assassination and personal malice get involved, this is just beyond the boundaries of any kind of construction. Again, this is a tool, and this is an effective tool. Sometimes we have to have force, but when we start getting into personal character assassination, and this really turns me off.
And I think the same thing for... Okay, go ahead, clap. The same thing for engagement. If you're going to meetings for the sake of being at the meeting, if you're not doing your homework and understanding that there are... And another thing that I think is important for us to understand, people make mistakes. There are mistakes that are made when you are trying to engage. There are mistakes that are made when you're trying to convey what you're doing to your constituency and to the public. So there are mistakes, and the best thing to do is to rectify those mistakes immediately, and when they're not, then that just adds to the people's confusion over what you're trying to do. So engagement, just like Abbas said, as far as protest, is not for the sake of being at a meeting. It's for, you're responsible when you're in the meeting for making sure you're advocating for the interests of the organization, number one. And that organization should be representing the interests of the community. So I think that's one thing where you go too far in terms of engagement.
And I think to add on to that, I think the moment somebody walks into the room, whether it's sitting at a table with Zionists, whether it's sitting at a table with the president, wherever you're sitting, the moment someone loses their sense of integrity and knowing what we know about people who are suffering, the moment you lose empathy for someone who is suffering is the moment you should pack up and go home. You should not be at the table if you cannot bring in your personal integrity.
Can I just say one thing? There was a guy by the name of Abdullah. Oh.
I think distinguishing between tactics and strategies and having multi-layer tactics and also having short, long, and extended strategy is very important. What I feel is that as a Muslim community, in general, we don't have a coherent strategy across the board. And what we have is organizations, each vying for its own agenda, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we don't have a strategy for the whole community. We don't have our platform. What is the Muslim community platform? How do we develop that platform? Where is our political strategy? Where are our political voter registration? So absent this, we begin to, and nothing against, including myself, we begin to fake it, assuming that we have power, we have none. And until we are able to begin to change that, we have still to play in that constructed field.
Okay, the first question. My voice is the only one you're going to hear. The first question from the field, or from the floor, rather, is for those who are pro-engagement, is it better to have that engagement at the cost of Muslim unity?
Well, that's assuming there's unity. There is no unity, for various reasons. And also, let's not confuse unity with conformity. When unity becomes conformity, you create a culture of intimidation. You try to force others to do things because you believe, maybe in your heart of hearts, probably in your heart of hearts, you believe you have to make people better Muslims, or you have to make non-Muslims Muslims, whatever, and you try to force it. And that creates a culture of intimidation. But we are used to being intimidated by others. We should not get into the point where now Muslims are trying to intimidate others, intimidate each other. So, yes, we want unity, but that means how do we band together with our differences of opinion? And the Quran says the enemies of Islam are banding together. Unless you band together, corruption and tyranny will spread. We have to band together, and that means by managing differences.
And so to echo onto that, I think our unity comes around our shared principles. What are those shared principles? Those are things like justice. Those are things like standing up against oppression. Those are really broad terms where our unity doesn't come around strategies and tactics. The Prophet and his companions, peace be upon all of them, did not have unity around strategies and tactics. They weren't a single issue society. We are the most diverse religious faith community in the world. We are not a single issue ummah. We have lots of different issues. I'm from the south side of Chicago. There are things that I care about in the south side of Chicago. I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot on one issue so I can't speak up on the other issue.
So another question is for Hatem and Abbas. Given the impasse between you and the other side,
We'll speak on the rights of people.
I guess I'm looking softly. Okay.
Given the impasse, so this is for Hatem and Abbas, given the impasse between you and the other point of view, where do we go from here?
I don't think, this setup really represents what can be accomplished, all right? There is an impasse over what is a pretty small problem, all right? And the scope of things, in the scope of the problems that we are confronted with and have the capability to solve. I need Samar at the Accelerator at University of Chicago. I need Salam at Impact. I need all of these people. I need Imam and Tepli, all right? We all need each other. And so the impasse that we think is there is one that is a problem that we will grow through. And so if we can put these differences to rest, this program to rest, I think that we can move forward and have a very, very strengthened community as we grow.
I'm gonna, of course, go ahead. I'm just standing here to get ready for this.
I think the issue is not about whether we reach impasse or not. I think the issue is that what are the American Muslim principles in engaging politically with our government that is today is the primary violator of our civil and human rights here and violating the civil and human rights of Muslims across the world. I cannot be fully conscious as an American knowing that my government have drones that are killing people on a daily basis. My tax money is going to fund that enterprise. For me, that's the issue that we need to discuss. What are the principles? What are the modes of engagement? And how we could bring change to that. And I think once we think of those principles, we could move beyond the current impacts.
Can I respond to that? And I actually absolutely agree with both of you. I think the only other thing is that we have issues in this world. We see the issue with the Syrian refugee crisis right now. If we don't have the ability to have conversation with power, we can't ask our government to take in refugees. We can't demand that of them if we don't know them. And if we don't have the ability, if we don't have the Andre Carsons and the Keith Ellisons, and if we don't have more of them, how are we going to ask them to do that? And secondly, I mean, to your point, I actually agree with everything you said. But having said that, is if when we're talking about Palestinian suffering, let's do something about that. Let's not put all of our energy into like wasting our time talking about 50 people who went on this program. Do something about it. I want you to do your work, and like it's similarly. And I think we all need to do our part.
Good.
Okay, another question. When it comes to either boycott or engagement, how is the American Muslim establishment deciding who or what to rise up against? We mentioned MLI, CDE, and the White House of Thug, but where are the condemnations of Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and solidarity with Black Lives Matter, or being outspoken against poverty?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm an equal opportunity guy. I boycotted and work against almost every cause that is there. So Black Lives Matter, we're there engaged with them, and we have a solidarity between Palestinians and African American community. What I don't want is to try to use the existing disparity relative to African Americans to use it against the Palestinians. And I wrote a letter last year where somebody says we can't engage in Palestine because we want to engage with our African American brother, and says don't be doubly racist by using the suffering of African Americans to silence Palestinians and then to create tension between Palestinians and African Americans. We need to dispense with this attempt to try to create layers of lack of engagement on the African Americans, on the Latinos, on Asian Americans. And where are the interfaith dialogue with African Americans churches? Where the interfaith dialogue with the Latinos on the borders? Where the interfaith dialogue with Asian Americans? Where is the interfaith dialogue with the Japanese? It seems that the only way we're stuck is interfaith with our counterpart in the Jewish community, and that's what we're concerned about.
I kind of want to bring the academic hat in on that question about who gets to decide. The fact that we don't have representative institutions in our community, in the country, it tells us something about the way issues come to float. I am completely sad and dismayed that we've spent so much time talking about certain kinds of programs as opposed to the refugee crisis. And I think really what that's indicative of is how shell-shocked we really are as a we, all right? And I think that we simply have overlooked how powerful we really can be as individuals and as a community. And so even though these identity politics rise to the surface, I want us to realize that that's an indication of a kind of structural weakness. And if we can attack that structural weakness, and those at the leadership, if we can open up viable paths for problem solving on the refugee crisis. Okay, Samar, you're at an accelerator. Give me a social entrepreneurship model that we can expand through the vast network of Muslim NGOs that we have. I'm working with all those NGOs. Let's make a commitment to make that happen. I think if we open up those paths, the community will start to strengthen itself and show its potential.
Okay, before people start to leave, I just want to make one quick announcement, which is to evaluate the session on the ISNA app. Please do that. We're very interested in what you think. There are a few questions that really ask about, is this a false dichotomy? Are there times for engagement and times for boycott? And if the panelists could mention, if that's the case, what would be the time for each? Is it a false dichotomy? Do we do both?
I'm of the position you have to do both, but there has to be a fully, completely strategy. So I want those who are engaged to actually praise those who are engaged in boycott, and not to really see it as a mutually exclusive strategy. For the engagement is to have a comprehensive engagement. So to have an engagement of voter registration, of voter participation, engaging with civil rights organizations that have been very critical of various pieces. So when we go and speak, we're speaking in a louder voice and a larger voice, and everybody is engaged within that process.
So, just to build on these points, number one, to the previous question, there is no such thing as an American Muslim establishment. It just doesn't exist. There are organizations that are trying to do the best they can with the situations at hand. And you guys, we all have to understand that the issues that are before us are enormous. There are the Syrian refugee crisis, the Palestinian issue, genocide of the Muslims in Myanmar and the Central African Republic, what's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in Chechnya, all of these issues, what's happening here in the United States in terms of our civil rights. These are enormous issues, and they are complex issues. So to come and give us this simplistic either this or that, I agree, it's a false dichotomy. And I agree with Hatem also. We, as leaders of organizations, representatives of organizations, have to come to the table and develop comprehensive strategies on these issues. We have not done that yet. And until we do, then all this talk and social media and back and forth, that's going to be, unfortunately, sucking and consuming our time. So if we want to have achieve anything on this issue of reforming national security policies vis-a-vis CVE, there should be a strategy meeting on that. If we want to deal with the Palestinian issue and how boycott versus engagement is impacting that, we need to have a strategy meeting on that. Until we do our homework, I just want to tell everybody, you know what? I don't want to hear it. Do your work, I'll do my work, and let's see whatever we can do together, let's do it together. If not, let's just pray for each other. And as the Prophet was advised in the Quran, when the Muslims violated his order in Uhud, what did they tell the Prophet? Go and treat them softly. Do not be harsh on them. And seek their advice. Consult with them. So in other words, do not disenfranchise them. I'm worried that our children are going to go ahead and do things without us because they're trying to stay away from all this bickering and infighting. And we're going to lose them in the process. So our job to work together to coalesce on common ground is critical. Sorry.
Just really quickly, I think I agree with what's been said already. I think that both boycott and engagement are not mutually exclusive. There's a push and pull that needs to happen. And I think what's interesting, I think we're hitting on a really important point to go back to that academic point, which is we need shared principles. We need to know what our core issues are as American Muslims, and then we can differ. It's okay to actually have different strategies and tactics. You can approach a problem in different ways. There's a lot to learn from Google. There's a lot to learn from Steve Jobs. There's a lot to learn from people who understood that this is what I'm doing, and there are 10 different approaches on how to get there.
Very quickly. Very quickly, on the notion of strategy, shared principles, and kind of general approach, I would encourage everybody in this room to download the RAND report, Building Moderate Muslim Networks. All right, if you're not familiar with this report, I think you need to become familiar with it. There is a logic behind the way our institutions are moving, and I think a general cornerstone of our strategy will be to how do we relate to the goals of this report, because state institutions and our institutions are all moving in that direction. So let us have a framework. Let's have a conversation about the RAND report and how our activity relates to the RAND report 10 years later.
We will have to leave it there. We are unfortunately out of time. If you want more information about ISQ, please check out our table outside. And we want to emphasize that our goal today was not to come to consensus. It was to walk away with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of ourselves. So I thank you for your time, and we look forward to next year's debate.